Reading 59 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Maurice, Nicoll, Volume 2. Burlip, February 8th, 1945. Commentary on Conscious Love. Some time ago, I received a letter in which a question was asked about a phrase occurring in the first epistle of John. The passage is about love, actually about conscious love. Now, all conscious love depends on throwing out what is bad and selecting only what is good. Mechanical love is of quite a different order. The passage in question was as follows, quote, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear, because fear hath punishment, and he that feareth is not made perfect in love." End quote. In the Gospel of John and in the Epistles of John, we find love emphasized, not emotional love as the conversation with Peter shows in the last chapter of the Gospel of John, but a different kind of love, which is connected with the idea of a goal, an aim, a gradual perfecting. In the above passage, the phrase perfect love really means, in the Greek, love that has reached perfection, as it were, through long trial and error. John followed the way of bhakti yoga. There are different kinds of yoga. Jnana yoga, which has to do with work on intellectual center. Bhakti yoga, which has to do with work on emotional center. Hatha yoga, which has to do with work on the moving center. And many branches of these three different lines which belong to man number 3, man number 2, and man number 1. In the fourth way that we are beginning to study, a man must work first in 2 rooms, and then in 3, and finally in a 4th room, if it is opened to him, because in the fourth way it is necessary for a man to reach some state of balance in which all his centers begin to reflect the work. But here in the writings of John, we have evidence of the way of bhakti yoga and the awakening of conscious love as distinct from mechanical, emotional love and physical love. The object of this way is to get in touch with higher emotional center directly through love. Of course, we cannot understand what this love is from our ordinary idea of love, which is turned outward toward physical objects. John is speaking of another kind of love, just as the work speaks of another kind of love possible for us, which is conscious love. But this kind of love is very far from us, and to imagine we possess it already is the greatest foolishness. We have to realize the illusions of love, and how we ourselves cannot love, and how indeed we both love and hate at the same time. For this reason, John says, "He who hateth his brother is in the darkness." And also, "If a man say, I love God, and hateth his brother, he is a liar." Further, he says that whoever has not this love of which he is speaking is dead. He speaks indeed of this love as a new birth, calling it being begotten of God, and says, quote, "Whosoever is begotten of God doeth no sin, because his seed abideth in him, and he cannot sin because he is begotten of God." End quote. All love, he teaches, comes from the love of something higher than oneself or the world. He says God is love, and the only way in which love can be made perfect is to know and acknowledge the existence of God. It is in this connection that he says, quote, "Herein is love made perfect." End quote. And that in this kind of love there is no fear, and that is why he also adds, quote, "If a man say, I love God, and hateth his brother, he is a liar." He speaks often of how this love conquers the world and all its fears and cares and anxieties. He is speaking of something that can be awakened within us that is stronger than anything in life. He is speaking of something that changes the signs in us and reverses them so that what was active becomes passive and what was passive becomes active. In this connection, you will remember the teaching in the work about personality and essence, about how personality is active and essence passive, and how a man must undergo a complete reversal within himself so that personality becomes passive and essence active, so that he is born anew. We are given no hint of the method of the school to which John belonged, but we can see that it was a bhakti yoga school. And we can also see how in the third epistle, someone called Gurdjieff had entered this school and was apparently trying to teach some other method. John says that he loved preeminence. Now, preeminence belongs to ordinary love, which is self-love. Everything we see in the Gospels about love is obviously not about self-love. When the disciples quarreled about preeminence, they were told that to be great in the sense of the kingdom of heaven, they must become servants. The world and its psychology in us is contrasted with the kingdom of heaven and its psychology, something utterly different. When this work speaks of imaginary I, false personality, and so on, it is seeking to begin to bring us into another orientation, into a new psychology of ourselves, which is ultimately called in the Gospels the kingdom of heaven. It is of this love that John is speaking, and not the love of the world. And of this love he says, quote, "If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes, and the vainglory of life, is not of the Father, but of the world." End quote. And he adds, speaking of the individual man and his attachments and identifyings, quote, "The world passeth away, and the lust thereof, but he that doeth the will of God abideth forever." End quote. If we could all of us catch this rope of which the work speaks and hold on to it, we would be better able to understand both what John means and what this work means. When the valuation of this work is great, it makes us strong inside, apart from what happens in life. We no longer have to prove ourselves in life, to satisfy our fear, to keep up our false personality, our reputation, because we begin to obey something quite different. In our case, the teaching of the work. And this keeps something eternally young in us, because we all have in us something that can always remain young and alive. But this means that we turn in another direction for our nourishment, and, passing through the doorway called self-observation, we begin to find what it is we really want and what we can really get. After a time, we begin to catch glimpses of what this love means of which John speaks, and which the work calls conscious love. Because as we cease to play with ourselves and invent ourselves, so do we cease to play with and invent other people. And instead of trying to meet them and get to know them from the outside inwards, we begin to feel and know them from inside outwards. We begin to feel a common existence which is without passion and simply is what it is without further definition. When we realize this point of inner experience, we begin to understand what conscious love is, however dimly. But unless we have separated ourselves from our invention and pictures and falsities, we cannot reach this point, which is indefinable. We reach this point only through something stronger than life. if the work, if the Gospels, if all esotericism had not something stronger behind it than anything in life, we could never reach this point. But you must understand that in the reaching of this point, endless struggles are necessary, endless failures, confusions, and uncertainties, because it is we ourselves who have to win to this point by inner choice. In all ages in the past, very many have reached this point, and they communicate their strength to us. Let us hope that we ourselves may reach this point where we come to realize that love that has become perfected casteth out all fear. Certainly, taking ourselves for granted, taking ourselves as one, never letting this work into ourselves to break us up, we cannot expect to reach this point. Only real I can love consciously. All this work is about how to reach real I. It is all about what eyes we have to leave behind from our own choice. Let us try to make a stronger feeling of the work in ourselves and all that it is connected with throughout the ages, and not simply be creatures of the moment.